Well, hello xenographers everywhere, and welcome to another episode. You know, I love digital photography, especially when it comes in the form of something like this, the Sony A7, with its ability to give you instant images and pretty much to use any lens that was ever made. However, I do still like to shoot the odd roll of film. And one of the questions when I do go out to shoot a roll of film is, which camera am I going to use? Will it be something like this, the Olympus OM10, which is a very nice little camera, very small, very pocketable, uses all the fantastic Zuiko lenses. It's got aperture priority auto exposure, which is really great because it cuts down one of the things that you have to think about. Would it be something like this, the good old, wonderful old Zuiko 3, that fantastic piece of Soviet industrial design that is aesthetically unique and a very, very nice camera as well? Could it perhaps be something like this, the lovely old Nikon FM, all manual exposure, built like a tank, an absolutely beautiful camera, access to a massive range of lenses, and a very, very nice old machine? Could it be something like this, the Olympus OM2, which is an absolutely beautiful little camera? It has all manual exposure if you want it, or aperture priority auto. It takes all the Zuiko lenses, it's beautifully manufactured, and it's a very, very nice looking camera as well. Could it be something like this, the Leica 3 with the Leitz 50mm Summitar f2? I have to say, more often than not, this is the camera and lens combination that I choose. It's an absolutely beautiful little kit. This body and this lens together are possibly the nicest bit of camera equipment that I know of. It's a truly beautiful combination. The lens is magnificently made and engineered, the body is magnificently made and engineered, and they complement each other perfectly, as indeed they were intended to. There is a little bit of block from this lens in the viewfinder, but hey, this is real photography, so who cares? And the fact that both the body and the lens are so beautifully finished adds to the tactile joy of using this thing. And I don't think that word joy is misplaced. It really is a joy to use. Everything is beautifully made, precision manufactured. The tolerances are all very, very tight. It didn't need to be made in this way. It's a machine that is not simply a utilitarian, practical piece of equipment. It's, in some senses, over-finished. Both a Jaguar and a Ford, for example, will get you where you need to go pretty quickly, pretty safely, and pretty reliably. But I think you'll have a rather nicer time in the Jag. And in the same way, both this camera and this camera, or indeed any of the other Russian rangefinders, will get you fairly similar results. There won't be a great deal in those results unless you look very closely, but using the Leica is just so much more a joy because it's so much more nicely made. So today I'm going to share with you the results of using this camera and lens combination with a roll of film. The camera itself is from 1936 and the lens is from 1950, so there are a few short years that lie between them. However, they were made for each other. They were made by the same company, by the same factory, and they are very, very much complementary. Now, if you've seen any of my other videos using this Summitar lens, then you'll know that this is one that has recently been sent to me very kindly by a viewer, Pippi Sunzina, and I am getting quite some use out of it. I've had the camera for a lot longer than I've had the lens, and I used to use mostly Russian lenses on it, the Industar 22 collapsible and the Jupiter 8, and now and again the Industar 61. And while they're all fantastic lenses, and they really are nice lenses, they're very nice colour rendition, especially the Industars. The Jupiter has a very nice muted contrast quality and some very nice background blur. So while they're very nice lenses, they just don't have the special quality that the Leitz lens has. The Leitz has beautiful background blur. I've not seen quite this quality of background blur in any other lens, and it's just magical. That's the only word I can use to describe it. It's a very sharp lens, it has beautiful background blur, and the camera and lens combination itself looks fantastic. The camera is very small, and if you collapse the lens, then you've got a more or less pocketable, high quality 35mm camera. Be under no illusions, these are not quick cameras to use. They have the separate rangefinder and viewfinder window here. So while you're manually focusing, you then have to swap windows to compose your shot. All the settings are manual, so you need to read the light and dial in the appropriate shutter speeds and aperture settings. This is by no means quick photography. In fact, the slow pace of this camera does become enjoyable. You simply can't rapid fire shots like you can with a digital. You have to adopt a different approach, and everything slows down and becomes much more enjoyable. Now, despite the beauty of its finish and the fineness of its engineering, I'm very well aware that the Leica 3 plus the Leitz Summitar is, when all said and done, just a camera. So much of what I'm saying does in fact apply to any other old rangefinder camera. Now, these old rangefinders have their disadvantages, of course, but when all's said and done, they are one of the simplest, most uncluttered, least complicated methods of getting a high quality image that you will ever find. And in that sense, they're beautiful because simplicity is beauty, at least in my opinion. So the film I'm using today is this film. This is Adox 100 Silvermax black and white. And the key selling point of this film is that it has, or is said to have, a 30% higher silver content than most other black and white films. So the idea is it's a very strong contrast film, and it certainly delivers in that respect. Having used a couple of rolls, there's no doubt that it does what it says on the tin. It's a very, very high contrast film indeed. So much so that when I shot the first roll on this Olympus OM10, I wondered if I'd overexposed, because it tends to make the highlights very much highlights and the dark areas very dark. So I did have to do a little bit of digital post-processing on those negatives just to get them so that they would give an image that wasn't very, very pushed in the contrast levels. In fact, as shot, this film does struggle with the greys. It's great at the lights and the darks, but it struggles a little bit with the greys, and I do think that certainly some digital post-processing is necessary with this type of film. It does have a certain character, it's very, very unique in its look, but it's a little bit over contrasty for my taste. Having said that, let's now have a look at some examples of what it can do. So as I said, this film is a very high contrast film, which means that sometimes it can look like you've overexposed your images, because it really does bump up the whites and bring down the blacks. After a little judicious playing around with digital software and editing the images in post, this is the kind of image you're left with, and for me this gives a really nice balance between ultra high contrast and good strong blacks and whites. In this picture of the E-Type here, we can see pretty much every detail on the car's bonnet. And look at the sharpness of that lens together with this 100 ASA film. Quite a combination. It did seem appropriate, as I was shooting a very old camera, to shoot some images of some old cars that would have been around at roughly the same time. You can see in this image that this film seems to really like chrome, and I suppose that's one of the areas that black and white film shows itself to the best. It's got very good exposure latitude. Some of the brighter areas on this shot I thought were completely blown out, but after bringing down the levels a little bit, I found that all the details were preserved. And that's a really good reason in favour of using film. Film still exceeds digital in its ability to handle overexposed areas, or what might at first seem like overexposed areas. There's no way I would have been able to get this amount of detail recovery from a digital file, no matter which camera it was shot on. Here's a shot that is, in some senses, a little bit of a mess, but I kind of like it. It has a nice ethereal feel to it. I'm not sure why the bottom is overexposed so much. It may be that I have a slight light leak in one of those 80-odd-year-old shutter curtains in the Leica. Or it may be that I've just got a flare off something. If you look at the limbs of the tree in the centre there, you can see the grain of this film very clearly. And that's kind of surprised me actually. For a 100 ASA film I would have thought to see much less grain. Perhaps that's the penalty you pay for the very high silver content in Adox 100. This shot of the little angel was shot at about f5.6 as I recall. It was a very bright day. I do like to usually shoot wide open, but on this occasion I couldn't. And you can see that the lens still preserves a lot of that very nice background blur feel that it has. And here we can see those lovely Leitz bokeh bubbles, especially on the far left of this shot. You can see them to their best advantage, but the Leitz Summitar really does a lovely job of background blur. This shot demonstrates the film's propensity for blacks or whites and not too much in between. The light was very strong when I took this shot, so I had to stop down a little bit. I think it's on about f5.6, so the blur isn't too strong, but really I think we've probably only got about 3 or 4 shades of blacks and whites in this shot. In fact, this shot I think is the only shot off the roll where I can see some nice graduation between harsh blacks and harsh whites. There are some nice delicate greys here, and this film clearly can do that. It just doesn't seem to want to in most situations. A Harley-Davidson V-twin. In my view, it's very difficult to beat the sound of any V engine, and the V-twin doesn't disappoint. Here's a nice old Bentley, just ready for the local bank manager or doctor, and if he was a photography fan, no doubt he'd have his Leica 3 plus Summitar in the passenger seat. Check out those tripod headlamps this Riley is wearing. Standard fare on all the posher UK cars of the 50s and into the 60s. The Riley, some Bentleys, the Rover P4s, all of them had those very classy lights shining out at the front. In this shot, I think I must have underexposed, and the contrast is much reduced, although the actual scale of grey, the range of blacks and whites and all points between is still not that great. Here we can see the sharpness of the lights to good effect. If you look at the subject's hair, especially towards the centre of the shot, you'll see that individual hairs are picked out here. In this shot, the film really shines. Because it's a high contrast film, it's given loads of punch to this shot. Those extremes of light and dark are simply not there on the wooden beam as you see it in life. This film has really highlighted them, pushed up the blacks, pushed up the whites, and this image really pops. So for comparison then, here are some shots using exactly the same film, Adox Silvermax 100, but shot using an Olympus OM10 plus a Zuiko 50mm 1.8. And the film displays exactly the same characteristics on the Olympus that it did on the Leica. That is, pushing up the whites and pulling down the blacks. So you end up with a very high contrast image indeed. And I must admit, I thought initially when I first saw these shots that I must have overexposed them. But in fact, it seems that I didn't, because both cameras have given the same result. On this shot of the window you can see a reasonable range of greys, blacks and whites. The sky of course is completely blown out because I was exposing for the window frame, but you can see some nice graduation on the frame itself. Here's the old Leica 3 wearing a Jupiter 8, and on the lens there you can actually see the grain fairly strongly. There's no detail to be seen on the camera body. That's all been taken straight to black with very little variation throughout. And it's the same story on this shot of the Zuiko 3. Now if you look at the top right of the image, you will see that grain pretty strongly coming through, and again all the dark areas have been crushed right down to black. Here's a very picturesque country sort of shot. This is one of the nicer shots I took on this shoot. This shot was quite overexposed, or it certainly appeared that way. I did a little digital post-processing on it and it's given the result you can see here. Although even so, the lighter parts of the image, such as the fronts of the boats there, do seem to have become rather blown out. And I couldn't really get much detail back from those areas. This shot was taken in Canterbury, and as you may not be too surprised to learn, it's a shot of a statue of Geoffrey Chaucer, author of the Canterbury Tales. And we've actually got a fairly nice range of blacks, whites and greys in that shot. This shot's worked quite nicely. Taken outside Pret-a-Manger in Canterbury. We didn't quite make it to the cathedral, so we finished our photographic pilgrimage with a nice sandwich in Pret. This duck didn't seem interested at all that I was shooting on film, nor even that I was shooting on a very high silver content film. He was, however, happy enough to pose for a photograph. Wait a minute, a picture of a digital camera shot with film? Is that ironic? Or is it just a picture of a digital camera shot with film? Yeah, I think it probably is. So there we are, a bunch of images shot with Adox Silvermax, a Leica 3 plus Leitz Summitar, and also an OM10 and 50mm 1.8. My profound and heartfelt thanks to everybody who watches this channel and everybody who subscribes. The more popular the channel becomes, the easier that makes it for me to continue production of these videos and to bring you information on interesting old cameras and some newer ones as well. If you've got any ideas of what you'd like me to review, any kind of kit or equipment or approaches or techniques, do get in touch, leave a comment, and I'll do my best to satisfy those requests. So that's it from me for now. Please do like and subscribe, and I will see you next time for more Zenography. Thanks for watching.